Today we're in Avebury. It's probably the second most famous Neolithic site in Britain, after Stonehenge, of course, which is quite nearby. But what remains is a huge stone circle which is partly present. There was actually a second circle. You can see fragments of stones in fields nearby. There's also Silbury Hill, less than a mile away. There was a stone-lined avenue heading off towards the sanctuary, which was a wood and stone henge. And there's burials and all sorts of treats from the Stone Age. But it really is quite unique. It's lovely to get here early in the morning. It doesn't get the crowds that you get in Stonehenge, but it does still get a little busy. So we're going to walk around the henge. We're starting near the avenue, so you'd have walked from the sanctuary down the avenue, which doesn't today go as far as the sanctuary. And then you'd reach this stone circle, and less than half of the stones are still present. But these are really substantial stones. It's hard to tell from the video, but these are probably about 8 to 10 foot high. And some of them are quite a bit bigger than that. There's a few that are getting on for 20 foot. They don't stick a huge amount underground. The majority is above ground. And there were 2 stone circles, and they were getting lost to time. Those appealing stones sticking out of the ground, much easier to pull them over and break them up than going to dig a quarry. And they were starting to be pillaged and destroyed. Luckily, Alexander Keeler, the heir to the Keeler Marmalade Company, realised how important this site was and bought it and demolished some of the newer buildings. So we're going to walk around the stone circle itself. You can see there's a couple of concrete posts where stones are missing. But this site, for about 2,000 years, was a very significant religious site. I mentioned the sanctuary. The sanctuary is a stone and wood combined henge. I think it's the only one in the country. And it's the bottom of the ridgeway. The ridgeway is a drover's path that's been in use for about 6,000 years that comes from Tring down to the sanctuary and terminates there. Now, there are beliefs that it used to go up to Norfolk and it used to go down to Dorset. But certainly in the last 2,000 years, it's been limited to that stretch, but it's quite easy to find. And clearly a lot of people did travel down here and come and worship, I would guess, at the stones. It's believed that initially there were wooden posts, then there were stones, there was a combination of both. But it's fascinating how it circles a village. There's literally a pub in the middle. You can sit in a pub having your lunch right in the middle of the stones, and you look out the back window when you go to the toilet, and there's a view out over these stones here in this field. And you can see there's 2 roads which bisect the town in both directions. Well, village, not town. Here's an example of a big stone. This is at least 20 foot tall. So it's a really huge piece of stone. And they weren't from far away, but they were pulled up and placed. Now, a lot of these stones over time had fallen over. If you see our video of Arbor Low, you'll see the stones all laid down. A lot of these had fallen over, been pushed over, laid down like that, because it was viewed as a pagan site. So in the Middle Ages, it was seen as being devil worship. And some of the stones were actually broken up, used for buildings, or buried altogether. And there are maps notes which show that the layout changed a little bit over time because of this interference, because it was seen as a pagan devil worshipping temple. But really, it's a beauty saved by Alexander Keeler. And there is a small museum inside the stones, which, if you're an English Heritage member, well worth a visit. If you're not, I would question the fee. It's not that amazing a museum. It's very interesting. The stones and most of Avebury are owned by English Heritage, and then there's the National Trust owns portions. So it's a little bit of a blend of the two. So here in the third field, they're much larger stones but wider apart. There's very much a change as you walk around the different sections. You do see that the size of the stones changes with each area. What this means is really baffling and pretty impossible to tell now because it's so many years since these were erected. We know very little about the people who built Avebury and worshipped in Avebury, but we know that there's a very special place it must have held at the end of one of the longest paths in Britain, and it's a bit like the landscape at Stonehenge, my first video for the Unbound Histories. It's not just the stones, it's the whole landscape and how it ties together. Within 2 miles in either direction, there's Silbury Hill, there's Churhill White Horse, and there was a Iron Age fort on top of that. There's the Devil's Den, there's the Sanctuary, there's portions of the avenue, and obviously West Kennet, Long Barrow, and a series of burials. But it's a very striking place, very quiet. I was here at about 10 in the morning here. I've been here at 6 and at sunrise, and there's nobody about, and you're just wandering around through a field. But very few people, just the odd tourist here getting in shot. And you see all the way round it is a henge, because a henge isn't a stone circle like Stonehenge. The henge is actually the ditch around it. So there's a ditch around and there's a raised section. And whilst there's hints of it at the other side of the village, you could see the ditch, you could see a bit of a mound, but they're a fraction of the size they used to be. One portion of it, it's still very high, and it reminds me of Maiden Castle, the outer ramparts, or if you go somewhere like Berkhamsted Castle, where it's a Motte and Bailey castle and it has a large banked wall around. It's that kind of scale. It's, I don't know, 30 foot tall. And it's pretty substantial. And you always have to remember that it's filled in over time. So they were roughly twice as high as this. And this is one of the real beautiful spots. As you cross the side road which leads up to the Devil's Den and the Valley of the Stones, there's a little staircase up here, and next to it is this tree. And from here it doesn't look that special. But this is called the Tolkien tree. And it's rumoured, is it rumour, is it myth? It's claimed that the Tolkien tree was J.R.R. Tolkien's inspiration for the Ents in The Lord of the Ring. And as you get in here, these very old trees with their roots intertwined and tangled down the banks, quite unique. I've not seen many trees like this. But it's this spot that you can see the offering left by druids, pagans, and those who are continuing the old way. You always find this close to significant temples and sites from the Neolithic. These little ribbons are offerings or prayers, like a Tibetan prayer flag, tied around. But sometimes you have a little note written and you can read what's been left. And sometimes it's just the silent intentions of those commemorating this spot and connecting with the thousands of years of spirituality in these temples. And this tree really is beautiful. It's not the oldest tree in Britain by any means, but it's unusual in just how tangled and higgledy-piggledy the branches or the root system of the tree is. And it's a nice spot to stop and listen to the birds. Because although it's very close to Stonehenge, it's about half an hour's drive. The one big difference here is that Stonehenge, there's always crows. And I've never understood what it is about Stonehenge that I never go to Stonehenge without seeing crows. Whereas here I didn't see any at all. Now, I'd love an explanation of why there are so many crows at Stonehenge. It's not like watching Hitchcock's The Birds, but there's always a couple of them. They like to sit and perch on the stone. So that's the Tolkien tree. As we head round, there's a path that's been built along the top of this bank. But you can see the scale. This is closer to how it would have been. And this bank has been here for 3,500, 4,000 years. So you can imagine it's eroded and slumped and filled in with vegetation. You can imagine how impressive it must have been when it was built. And obviously the tools they would have been antlers from deer and not metal axes or anything. No JCB diggers for the builders of Avebury. It's not as old as Stonehenge, but it's a very complicated monument, and it's harder, I think, to interpret the landscape. You can see that they're all interconnected. It's not just I'm going to build a church here because I live here, or I'm going to build it because something happened here. But around all the compass points, there are different, I'll call it a temple, henges. And it really is a very significant site. I've been quite a few times now, and every time I go, I enjoy it in a different way. And luckily, it was saved by our marmalade man. And if you look in the middle here, we've just walked around those banks on the four sides. But in the middle there is a little village. And there is a manor house you can visit. There's a quite nice church. And here in the foreground is where the avenue begins. And we'll cover that another time. But the avenue, it used to run about 2 miles to the sanctuary. And there was another avenue coming out the other side, leading towards Churhill White Horse, which would be where those hills in the horizon are, but a little bit further left. And there would have been another stone circle to the left of this, facing this direction. It's a very substantial historic monument, and quite an enigmatic one. It's very hard to figure out quite what they did. You don't have the alignment with the sun of Stonehenge that makes it so nice and clean. It's just a very beautiful and important place, and in many ways I prefer it to Stonehenge. Yet so few books are written about it. So few people visit compared to Stonehenge. My advice would be, if you're visiting Stonehenge, start or end your day with Avebury? If you've already seen the sunrise at Stonehenge, then maybe start down at the beginning of the avenue and wind your way down the avenue to Avebury, and you'll arrive before all the visitors, before everything opens, and you can enjoy the stones in their real beauty.